I was holding a crystal glass of 12-year-old bourbon in a ballroom full of Kentucky elite when my husband handed me a blue folder that was supposed to end my life. 2 weeks before he publicly served me those divorce papers, $540,000 quietly disappeared from our joint account. His mother was on the receiving end. He thought the public humiliation would break me. He forgot I hunt corporate fraud for a living. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire fraudulent existence here on Sarah Told Stories, I want to know where you are watching from and how old you are in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to financially outsmart a toxic family who tried to leave you with nothing. The ambient hum of the Louisville Charity Gala seemed to freeze. Around us, the polite clinking of crystal glasses paused in midair. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in silk shifted their gazes, drawn by the sudden sharp tension radiating from our table. Nathan stood a few feet away, swirling the amber liquid in his own glass. A smug, satisfied grin stretched across his face as a stranger in a cheap suit stepped forward, thrusting the thick legal envelope into my hands. I glanced down. Through the transparent window of the envelope, the divorce petition stared back at me. At the bottom of the visible page, a dark, deliberate signature slashed across the designated line. The ink was distinct midnight blue, flowing from the custom-engraved gold fountain pen I had purchased for his 35th birthday using our joint checking account. He expected a scene. Nathan is a local commercial developer who thrives on theatrics. He orchestrated this public ambush in front of the state bourbon aristocracy to ensure I felt maximum shame. He anticipated that the working-class girl he married would shatter under the weight of high society judgment, weeping and begging for an explanation. I offered him nothing. Without uttering a single syllable, I set my glass on the linen-draped table, turned my back on his victorious smirk, and walked calmly through the parting crowd toward the marble restrooms. Once the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, the facade of the dutiful wife vanished. My pulse remained steady. I leaned against the cool tile, unlocked my phone, and bypassed the standard banking application, opening the encrypted financial tracker I used for high-level monitoring. A seasoned auditor knows that a surprise divorce is rarely about a failing romance. It is always about capital. My eyes scanned the digital ledger of our shared life savings. The foundational boulder dropped heavy and undeniable. Exactly 14 days prior, our entire liquid net worth was gone. I traced the routing numbers with a few swift keystrokes. The destination was a newly established account, registered under a single name, Virginia, my status-obsessed mother-in-law. Attached to the wire transfer was a single mocking memo line that read, "Safekeeping." Nathan had assumed my humiliation tonight would paralyze me. He calculated that the shock of a public filing would blind me to the financial hemorrhage happening in the background. But in his rush to secure his new life, he forgot who he married. I am a senior compliance auditor for a global bourbon conglomerate. I dismantle elaborate corporate fraud syndicates for a living. Tracking hidden money is not just my job, it is my specialized weapon. I slipped the phone back into my evening gown pocket. I did not return to the ballroom to confront the man who had just stolen $500,000. There was no strategic advantage in a shouting match. Instead, I bypassed the gala entirely, stepping out the side exit into the cool, crisp Kentucky night air. The grief that typically follows a broken marriage never materialized, evaporating instantly into a sharp, tactical focus. The war had officially commenced, and my first objective was securing my home turf. The cool Kentucky night whipped through my open car window as I navigated the winding two-lane highway, leaving the glowing lights of the charity gala far behind me. I drove purely on muscle memory. My mind was already compartmentalizing the betrayal, organizing the raw shock into neat, actionable data points. I guided my sedan up the long gravel driveway of our bluegrass estate. The headlights swept across the manicured lawns and the pristine white fencing. I had personally audited the finances for those fences, reviewing every invoice when we bought the property 3 years ago. Nathan insisted we needed the sprawling acreage to project the correct image for his commercial development firm. I paid the down payment. He took the credit. I parked near the grand portico, stepped out of my heels, and walked up the brick steps with a steady rhythm. The brass key slid into the lock, but the internal cylinder refused to give. The deadbolts were fresh. The heavy wooden door swung open from the inside before I could even withdraw the key. Virginia stood in the doorway, blocking the threshold. She wore a silk dressing gown and a string of oversized pearls resting against her collarbone. A trained eye could spot the uniform perfection of the beads. They were glass, weighted to mimic real luxury. She projected the illusion of generational wealth, but the reality was far more pathetic. She grew up leasing luxury cars she could not afford to impress women she secretly despised. She looked down her nose at me, wearing a practiced expression of aristocratic disdain that she reserved specifically for my working-class roots. "You can stop jiggling the handle, Holly," she said, her tone dripping with mock pity. "Nathan felt it was prudent to secure the property. He always said you were prone to irrational emotional outbursts. We just want a smooth transition." "The property is a marital asset, Virginia," I stated, keeping my posture relaxed and my voice even. I grew up calculating inventory in the back room of a hardware store. I knew better than to negotiate with a thief standing on the other side of a locked door. "Oh, the lawyers will sort out the bricks and mortar," she waved a manicured hand dismissively. "But if you are wondering about the cash, do not bother. That $540,000 was simply the repayment for a family loan. Nathan owed it to me from years ago. We are just settling our debts before the probate courts get involved." She smiled a slow, self-satisfied smirk. A family loan. It was a blatant, lazy fabrication designed to launder marital assets right before a divorce filing. Before I could respond, her cellular phone chimed. She answered it without breaking eye contact, holding the device to her ear. "Yes, Martha. The gala was lovely," she purred, transitioning seamlessly into her Southern Belle persona. "Oh, I am just dealing with a minor housekeeping issue at the estate. Yes, my financial planner finalized the paperwork this afternoon. The money is resting in an ironclad, irrevocable trust." She emphasized the words irrevocable trust, leaning forward slightly so I would hear the permanence in her voice. She thought the legal term sounded impenetrable, like a fortress vault. She had zero comprehension of the financial reality. Irrevocable meant the funds were permanently trapped. When the federal authorities eventually froze that account under suspicion of money laundering, she would not be able to withdraw a single dime to hire a defense attorney. Now it was my turn to act. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my posture. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I squeezed my eyes shut, pushing a surge of adrenaline into my tear ducts until warm tears spilled over my eyelashes and ran down my cheeks. "You took everything," I choked out, letting my voice crack into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. I sank onto the top brick step, burying my face in my trembling hands. I rummaged blindly through my evening clutch, pulling out a crumpled tissue. As I did, I intentionally dislodged a folded piece of printer paper. It fluttered onto the porch landing, face up near the toe of her designer slipper. It was a printed email highlighting bold text inquiring about high-interest payday loans and emergency cash advances. Virginia glanced down, reading the header. Her fake sympathy evaporated into a sneer of pure triumph. This red herring fed her narcissistic ego perfectly. She thought I was already drowning, searching for predatory cash advances just to survive the week. This fabricated desperation would make Nathan dangerously complacent. He would assume his financial starvation tactic was working flawlessly. She nudged the paper away with her foot. "Pick up your trash, Holly." Speaking of which, she reached back in the lit foyer and dragged out a black plastic garbage bag. She tossed it onto the bricks where it landed with a dull thud. "Nathan packed a few of your cheap business suits. The rest of the wardrobe stays. Now leave before I call the local sheriff to report a hostile trespasser." I gathered the garbage bag and the crumpled email, keeping my head bowed in fake defeat. I walked back to my car without another word. I drove down the long driveway, merging onto the county highway. The tears vanished the exact second the estate disappeared from my rearview mirror. My face settled back into a mask of cold, clinical calculation. I checked into a roadside motel on the obscure outskirts of the county. The neon sign buzzed erratically outside the thin glass window, casting a harsh red glow over the worn carpet. The room smelled of stale smoke and cheap bleach, a stark contrast to the crystal chandeliers of the charity gala. I tossed the trash bag into the corner and sat down at the flimsy particle board desk. I did not sleep. I unzipped my leather briefcase and pulled out my corporate laptop. The screen illuminated the dim room, throwing sharp shadows against the peeling wallpaper. I engaged my virtual private network, establishing a secure, encrypted connection to my compliance auditing software. Virginia believed her newly funded trust was an invisible vault, hiding in plain sight. She did not realize that in the digital age, every single transaction leaves an indelible footprint. I inputted the routing numbers from our drained joint account. The software hummed, running complex diagnostic traces through regional banking registries. The data populated on my screen in cascading lines of code. The money had moved from our local bank into an obscure holding account and then funneled directly into the newly established trust. I mapped the exact architecture of the accounts, finding every hidden node. The setup was remarkably sloppy. Nathan had established the holding account using his primary commercial development firm as a guarantor. By linking his business directly to his mother's fraudulent trust, he left the digital backdoor wide open for me to walk right through. I pivoted my search, diving much deeper into his private commercial ledgers. If he was careless enough to link his business to stolen marital funds, he was hiding other secrets in the dark corners of his balance sheets. I ran a cross-referencing algorithm against his monthly expenditures, filtering out standard operational costs and legitimate vendor payments. The software chewed through the encrypted layers of his commercial ledgers. I watched the progress bar inch forward, my mind operating with surgical detachment. I pulled the corporate tax filings, the vendor invoices, and the payroll distributions. Nathan fancied himself a master of real estate development, a titan of local industry. But looking at his raw financial data, I saw the truth. He was a disorganized amateur playing a very dangerous game with capital that did not belong to him. When the anomaly finally surfaced on my monitor, it glowed like a distress flare in the dark. A recurring line item coded ambiguously as Site Development Consultation. I isolated the transactions. Every first of the month, a 5-figure sum vanished from his commercial operating account. I initiated a reverse trace on the receiving institution. It bypassed the usual construction vendors and landed squarely in the escrow account of a premier property management firm. I pulled the public records for that specific management company. They specialized in one very niche market. They managed sprawling, elite equestrian estates in the most expensive zip codes of the Bluegrass region. The monthly lease payment was exorbitant. Nathan had zero interest in thoroughbreds. He only tolerated the local racing culture when it allowed him to rub elbows with wealthy investors. He was pouring a fortune into a horse farm he never visited. He was paying for someone else to live in high society luxury, subsidized entirely by the pristine financial reputation I had spent a decade building. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a new distinct trail of deceit unspooled before my eyes. The routing numbers were leading me straight to a hidden resident living on my stolen dime, setting the stage for an entirely new layer of betrayal. The harsh glare of my laptop screen illuminated the peeling floral wallpaper of the roadside motel room. I sat rigid in a cracked vinyl chair with my fingers flying across the keyboard. The bitter taste of cheap lobby coffee lingered on my tongue, but my mind operated with sheer crystalline precision. I had spent the past hour dissecting the ambiguous consulting fees bleeding out of Nathan's commercial development ledgers. The trail of breadcrumbs led away from routine construction expenses and funneled directly into the escrow account of a premier property management conglomerate. I initiated a targeted query into the firm public filings, cross-referencing their active leases with the masked limited liability company Nathan had used to mask the transactions. The encrypted firewall was standard commercial grade, meaning it took me less than 4 minutes to bypass the perimeter and access the raw, unredacted lease agreements. The documents materialized on my screen, revealing the exact coordinates of a sprawling equestrian estate nestled deep within the most exclusive zip code of the Kentucky Bluegrass region. The lessee listed on the pristine digital contract was not my husband. The signature belonged to Lauren, a 28-year-old luxury real estate agent who catered specifically to elite horse breeders and bourbon barons. I pulled up her professional profile on a secondary monitor. Her curated portfolio displayed a woman draped in tailored riding jackets and polished leather boots, projecting an aura of inherited high society status. Nathan had not just engaged in a fleeting motel rendezvous, he had established a parallel universe financing a breathtakingly expensive lifestyle to buy the silence and affection of a woman desperate to climb the local social ladder. My eyes scanned the financial parameters of the lease agreement, and a fresh wave of cold realization washed over my skin. The monthly premium for a property boasting customized stables and acres of pristine grazing land was staggering. Nathan ran a mid-level commercial firm that consistently struggled with cash flow issues. He simply did not possess the liquid capital to secure a multi-year contract of this magnitude on his own merit. I pulled the underwriting annex attached to the digital file. The underwriting agents required a guarantor with an impeccable debt-to-income ratio to underwrite the risk. There, sitting plainly on the digital application, was my own name. Nathan had weaponized my financial discipline. He forged my authorization and leveraged my flawless credit score to secure the sprawling farm for his mistress. He utilized the sterling reputation I built through a decade of rigorous corporate auditing to pass the stringent background checks. If his development firm ever missed a single payment, the wealthy property owners would not pursue him. They would legally garnish my wages and decimate the unvested corporate stock options I had spent years earning. He was building his fraudulent aristocratic fantasy squarely upon my shoulders. I dug deeper into the hidden corporate credit card he used to cover the incidental expenses of this secret life. The itemized statements scrolled past my weary eyes, displaying endless charges for fine dining, imported wines, and upscale boutique shopping sprees. One specific transaction glared like a neon sign in the darkroom, a $15,000 charge routed to a bespoke leather artisan in Europe. The attached invoice detailed the purchase of a custom-fitted imported saddle. While I spent 80-hour weeks scrutinizing supply chain logistics and balancing ledgers for a global bourbon conglomerate to pay the mortgage on our primary home, my husband was purchasing exorbitant riding equipment for a woman half his age. The sheer audacity required to maintain this deception demanded a thorough digital mapping. I needed to know exactly who else was granted access to this pristine sanctuary. Modern luxury estates are invariably equipped with smart home technology, relying on cloud-based security systems for remote monitoring. I extracted the Internet Protocol address embedded in the property management invoice and pinged the external security hub of the horse farm. The system administrators had lazily utilized default factory passwords for the external cameras. I slipped into the main video directory undetected, navigating through weeks of archived motion-triggered event logs. I selected a video file time-stamped from a sunny Tuesday afternoon just 3 weeks ago. The high-definition footage loaded, displaying the expansive wraparound porch of the equestrian estate. The camera angle provided a flawless view of two women lounging in ornate wicker rocking chairs. My breath caught in my throat. Sitting on the left, draped in a pastel sundress and adjusting a familiar strand of counterfeit pearls, was Virginia. My mother-in-law held a tall, frosted glass of sweet tea condensation dripping onto her manicured fingers. Sitting right beside her was Lauren, laughing brightly at something the older woman had just said. The audio feed picked up the clear, melodic sound of their shared amusement. Virginia reached over and patted Lauren affectionately on the knee. The betrayal radiating from the screen transcended mere infidelity. This was a celebrated alliance. Virginia had actively endorsed the affair. She happily played house on the sun-drenched porch, sipping iced tea while enjoying the tranquil views of grazing horses. She basked in the stolen luxury that my credit score provided, openly mocking my existence by welcoming the mistress into the family fold. They treated me as an oblivious, expendable utility, a blind workhorse meant only to generate the capital necessary to fund their elite illusions. I stared at the paused image of Virginia smiling on that porch, and a vivid memory from 20 years ago surfaced in my mind. I saw the worn wooden floorboards of my father's modest hardware store, smelling faintly of sawdust and motor oil. I remembered the heavy, callous texture of his hands as he packed his remaining inventory into cardboard boxes. A ruthless commercial developer, wearing expensive, shiny shoes, had engineered a predatory zoning dispute, squeezing my father out of his lease and forcing him into an agonizing bankruptcy. I watched a hard-working man lose his dignity because an arrogant opportunist decided the rules did not apply to him. That specific day forged the iron in my spine. It was the exact catalyst that drove me to study finance, to master the intricate laws of compliance, and to become a relentless auditor. I dedicated my entire career to hunting down corrupt men who build their fragile empires by stepping on the necks of honest people. Nathan was not just a cheating spouse anymore. He was the exact breed of parasitic predator I was trained to obliterate. I did not pick up my phone to call him. I did not send a furious text message to Virginia. Confrontation provides the enemy with invaluable intelligence. Instead, I methodically downloaded every single video file, every itemized receipt, and every forged signature document. I organized the raw data into heavily encrypted folders, archiving the metadata on a secure external drive. I was quietly constructing an inescapable digital armory, brick by brick. The silence of the motel room was abruptly shattered by the harsh, violent vibration of my corporate cell phone resting on the laminate desk. I glanced at the glowing screen, expecting a routine, automated alert from our server maintenance team. The caller identification displayed the direct extension for the Director of Human Resources at the Bourbon Conglomerate headquarters. A phone call from that specific department at this hour of the night signaled an unprecedented crisis. I picked up the device and swiped the screen to answer, holding the speaker to my ear. I offered a standard professional greeting. The voice on the other end did not return the pleasantry. The HR director sounded strained, his words clipped and heavy with formal institutional urgency. He informed me that the company legal department had just received a disturbing official document from the local authorities. My pulse remained a steady drumbeat as I listened to the devastating details of my husband's next tactical strike. Nathan had not just filed for divorce, he had initiated a deliberate, catastrophic campaign to sever my professional lifeline and freeze my corporate salary. The voice of the Human Resources Director echoed through the speaker of my phone with a heavy, grim cadence. He read the details of the official complaint submitted to the corporate legal department just hours prior. Nathan had sworn a formal affidavit claiming I was suffering from severe substance abuse issues. He fabricated a highly detailed narrative describing me throwing a glass liquor bottle at him during a drunken rage. He cited a specific date and time, ensuring the lie sounded authentic to an impartial corporate reviewer. His objective was incredibly transparent. My employment contract contained a strict moral turpitude clause. If I were terminated under such severe disciplinary conditions, I would instantly forfeit my unvested corporate stock options. Those shares were scheduled to mature in less than 30 days. They represented the bulk of my independent financial war chest. Nathan wanted me fired and disgraced, ensuring those assets vanished before a judge could divide our estate. He sought to starve me out, leaving me destitute, while he funded his new life with my stolen savings. I thanked the director for the notification, ended the call, and set the device on the cheap laminate desk of the motel room. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light through the thin curtains. I picked up my phone again to check my local community feeds. The professional sabotage was only one half of his calculated strike. Lauren and Virginia had initiated a synchronized character assassination targeting the elite social circles of Louisville. Lauren posted a series of cryptic messages on her professional real estate page discussing her bravery in standing up to toxic, unstable individuals. Virginia utilized her extensive country club network. She shared public links to local addiction recovery centers, adding a veneer of fake maternal sympathy. She commented on community boards asking for prayers for a family dealing with a sudden tragic substance abuse crisis. The social isolation took effect with clinical speed. My phone remained dead silent. Women I had hosted for dinner parties did not call to ask for my side of the story. A local charity board member sent a brief, cold email revoking my seating assignment at their upcoming fundraising gala. Virginia and Lauren wanted to drown me in public shame. They expected me to expend all my energy frantically denying the rumors, trying to salvage a reputation they had already poisoned. I ignored the social media notifications entirely. I showered, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, and drove directly to the corporate headquarters of my bourbon conglomerate. The towering glass building overlooked the Ohio River, projecting a quiet, formidable power. I bypassed my usual desk and walked straight into the mahogany-paneled executive boardroom on the top floor. 3 senior vice presidents sat across the long, polished table. A printed copy of Nathan and his sworn affidavit rested near the center. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and apprehension, bracing themselves for a tearful, hysterical breakdown from a ruined wife. I took my seat, smoothed the fabric of my skirt, and unlatched my leather portfolio. I did not offer a single tear. I did not raise my voice to defend my character. Emotional pleas hold zero weight in a room governed by logic and risk management. I slid a single sheet of paper across the smooth mahogany surface. It was not a character reference from a therapist. It was a highly detailed, geolocated Internet protocol log. The senior director picked up the paper, adjusting his reading glasses. I explained the data with surgical precision. The digital police report Nathan submitted was uploaded to the municipal server at 9 in the evening on a Tuesday. The originating network trace did not originate from our Kentucky estate. The routing data pointed directly to a wireless network registered to an exclusive luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. I handed the executives a secondary document containing my secure corporate access badge swipes and a photograph of me standing on a brightly lit stage. At the exact moment my husband claimed I was violently assaulting him in our kitchen, I was 200 miles away delivering a keynote presentation at a compliance seminar in Lexington. The executives reviewed the undeniable math. The uncomfortable tension in the boardroom evaporated, instantly replaced by a profound, unified disgust for the man attempting to weaponize their legal department. The senior director reached for the fabricated complaint, preparing to shred the document and issue a formal statement of support for my continued employment. I raised my hand, stopping his motion. I looked the senior director in the eye and requested a formal, unrecorded leave of absence. I explained the strategic necessity of my request. I needed my husband to believe his strike had hit the intended target. If Nathan thought his sabotage succeeded, he would lower his guard. He would assume I was sitting in a dark room, suspended without pay, wallowing in misery. An arrogant enemy celebrating a false victory becomes careless with their hidden ledgers. The executives understood the tactical brilliance of the silence. They granted my request, freezing my internal corporate footprint to sell the illusion of my termination. I walked out of the glass tower a phantom. I retreated to the obscure motel and spent the next 48 hours forging a specialized weapon. Operating entirely off the grid, I established a blind corporate entity. I registered Apex compliance using a state framework designed to shield executive identities. I secured a dedicated tax identification number and established a pristine, secure digital banking portal. I funded the holding company using a private secure account. I now possessed an invisible, untouchable vehicle capable of executing hostile financial maneuvers without ever tracing back to a discarded wife. With my new anonymous clearance primed, I turned my crosshairs directly onto Nathan and his commercial development firm. He projected the image of a visionary builder reshaping the local skyline with high-end retail spaces and luxury condominiums. I stripped away the glossy architectural renderings and the curated press releases, digging straight into the raw municipal data. I pulled his public land acquisition records and cross-referenced them against his private vendor invoices. I spent hours mapping the flow of his operational capital, tracing the money he used to secure premium commercial zoning permits in the downtown district. Nathan portrayed himself as a self-made titan of industry, but an auditor knows how to spot the cracks in a foundation. The numbers simply did not align. The costs associated with securing his recent zoning permits far exceeded the liquid capital available in his legitimate business accounts. A glaring inconsistency glowed on my monitor. He had funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into a municipal escrow account to finalize a massive commercial plot. I initiated a trace on the funding source, expecting to find a standard commercial bank loan or a private investor group. Instead, the routing numbers bypassed the traditional financial sector entirely. The digital trail led directly toward a restricted government portal. I leaned closer to the screen, the cold light reflecting in my eyes. Nathan was not just shuffling money between private shell companies. The capital backing his latest commercial development project originated from a heavily monitored federal registry. He was injecting government funds into a private commercial venture. A slow, chilling realization traced its way down my spine. The scope of his greed transcended simple marital theft. He was manipulating resources on a scale that invited the wrath of federal authorities, and he had left a glowing digital footprint leading right to his front door. The restricted government portal glowed on my monitor, casting a harsh bluish light across the cramped motel room. The air conditioning unit rattled in the corner, but the ambient noise faded into irrelevance as my fingers moved across the keyboard. I bypassed the superficial municipal ledgers that standard investigators might review. Using the anonymous clearance of Apex Compliance, I penetrated the deeper federal tracking database. The digital seal hovering at the top of the newly decrypted file belonged to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Nathan always possessed a dangerous charisma. It was the same charming veneer Virginia instilled in him since childhood, teaching him to project an image of immense wealth, regardless of their actual bank balance. She raised him to believe that status was the only currency that mattered in Kentucky society. He used that polished, inherited swagger to lobby the city council. He successfully secured a community revitalization grant intended to restore historic brick facades in the neglected downtown districts of Louisville. The allocation was meant to stimulate local contractors and breathe economic life back into marginalized commercial zones. But the funds never reached the designated masonry companies. I traced the disbursement from the federal treasury into his primary commercial escrow. $250,000 of government capital had been surgically extracted. My husband did not just steal from our joint savings. He was operating a sophisticated washing machine. I mapped the exact chronological flow of the missing capital, utilizing a layered forensic spreadsheet. First, he routed the stolen federal grant into a secondary, obscure corporate shell he registered under a vague consulting moniker. Then he funneled our personal marital assets, the exact remainder needed to reach $540,000, into that same shell account. He deliberately commingled the legitimate money with the stolen government funds. This created a convoluted financial stew designed to confuse any routine civilian divorce audit. Once the capital was thoroughly mixed and the original source obscured, he initiated a singular wire transfer out of the shell entity. The destination was the highly publicized, irrevocable trust his mother had just established. To secure the federal funds and move them off the grid, Nathan needed to authorize a digital signature stamp. I pulled the raw metadata attached to the execution protocol. The timestamp read exactly 14 days prior, right at 2 in the afternoon. I leaned back in the creaking vinyl chair and pulled up a secondary monitor. I opened the public social media profile belonging to Lauren. I scrolled past the curated images of thoroughbred horses and designer handbags, stopping on a post published on that exact same day. The upload time was just 30 minutes after the fraudulent transfer cleared the system. The photograph displayed his mistress, leaning against the hood of a brand-new silver Mercedes convertible, holding a pristine set of keys. The caption thanked her generous, supportive partner for celebrating her recent real estate milestones. He literally utilized embezzled taxpayer dollars to finance a luxury German vehicle for his 28-year-old affair partner. The sheer scale of their collective arrogance left me breathless. I thought about Virginia strutting through the exclusive corridors of her country club over the past week. She boasted loudly to her wealthy peers about her ironclad financial planning. She proudly told anyone who would listen that she was shielding her son and his hard-earned capital from a greedy, unhinged wife. She thought she was executing a brilliant high society maneuver, protecting her bloodline from a woman she viewed as inferior. My mother-in-law possessed zero understanding of federal banking regulations. By willingly accepting the blended cash and placing it into a registered trust bearing her own name, Virginia transformed herself from a petty enabler into an active accessory to federal money laundering. She was harboring stolen government property. She built an inescapable cage for herself and locked the door from the inside, believing she had secured a fortress. This revelation shifted my perspective on Nathan and his commercial development firm entirely. A successful developer does not risk decades in a federal penitentiary to steal $250,000 unless he is backed into a severe, inescapable corner. I ran a comprehensive diagnostic on his corporate operating accounts, projecting his current burn rate against his actual legitimate revenue streams. The graphs rendered on my screen in a steep, terrifying dive. The business was an elaborate optical illusion. He was bleeding cash at an unprecedented pace. The lavish horse farm, the imported saddles, the luxury vehicles, and the expensive country club dues had drained his firm dry. He was entirely unable to cover his standard payroll obligations. His suppliers were marking his invoices past due. The facade of the wealthy bluegrass tycoon was fracturing under the weight of his own profound greed. To keep the fraudulent operation afloat, he needed a massive influx of immediate capital. The stolen federal grant was merely a temporary bandage on a gaping arterial wound. The municipal auditors would eventually require progress reports on the downtown revitalization project. If he could not produce the restored brick facades or the itemized contractor receipts, the city would launch an official inquiry. He needed to replace the stolen grant money fast. I scanned his most recent liability filings, searching for the desperate lifeline he must have grabbed. The search algorithm flagged a freshly minted debt instrument registered a mere 3 days before he handed me those divorce papers at the charity gala. I bypassed the encryption on his corporate loan directory and opened the digital promissory note. It was not originated by a traditional commercial bank. The lending institution listed on the document was a notorious shadow equity firm known for predatory, high-yield lending. They catered to desperate men who could not survive standard underwriting scrutiny. I read the covenant details, studying the ruinous terms. He borrowed $2.5 million. I scrolled down to the signature page to see what asset he leveraged to secure such a staggering sum. My eyes locked onto the primary guarantor line, and a fresh wave of ice traveled down my spine. The trap he built was far deadlier than I ever anticipated, setting the stage for a ruinous financial collision. The digital promissory note glared from the screen, illuminating the dark motel room with a harsh white light. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the text of the lending covenant. Nathan had secured a staggering $2.5 million from a predatory private equity firm operating deep within the unregulated shadow banking sector. I scanned the terms and felt a chill trace the line of my spine. The interest rate was locked at an extortionate 25% compounding monthly. This was not a standard commercial development loan designed to build retail spaces. This was toxic mezzanine debt. It was financial poison meant to swallow a desperate borrower whole. Nathan acquired this ruinous obligation just days before handing me the divorce papers at the charity gala. The timeline exposed his exact strategy. He needed an immediate influx of cash to replace the stolen federal grant money before the impending municipal audit exposed his embezzlement. By quietly injecting this toxic loan into his commercial operating accounts, he could patch the bleeding hole in his ledger, appease the government inspectors, and walk away looking like a legitimate businessman. But a shadow lending firm does not hand over millions of dollars to a struggling developer based on charm. They require an ironclad guarantee. They demand pristine collateral. I scrolled past the dense legal jargon down to the final execution page of the contract. The guarantor section required a signature from an individual possessing a flawless debt-to-income ratio. There, on the glowing screen, rested my own name. I magnified the digital document 400%. The pixelation revealed the physical mechanics of the ink. It was written in a generic blue ballpoint pen. The strokes forming my signature were hesitant and shaky. The pressure applied to the paper was entirely inconsistent, lacking the fluid muscle memory of my actual handwriting. It was an amateur tracing job. Nathan had forged my authorization deliberately, leveraging the immaculate credit score I had spent 15 years carefully cultivating. A profound question immediately formed in my mind. I utilized a premium identity protection service specifically designed to alert my phone the second a hard inquiry hit my credit profile. A loan of this magnitude should have triggered a dozen automated fraud warnings, yet my phone had remained entirely silent. To understand the breach, I extracted the raw metadata embedded within the digital loan file. I pulled the document properties, the author tags, and the hidden routing history. The origination origin did not point to the lending institution. The initial draft was generated on a commercial computer registered to a boutique real estate brokerage in Lexington. I queried the specific agent identification number attached to the file properties. The state registry returned a single matching profile. The license belonged to Lauren. The 28-year-old mistress was not just a passive recipient of imported saddles and luxury horse farms. She was an active financial predator. She orchestrated the entire toxic transaction. Through her connections in the high-end real estate market, she introduced my husband to the predatory lenders. The closing documents revealed she secured a staggering six-figure broker kickback for facilitating the deal. To ensure the transaction closed without alerting me, she utilized a corrupt, low-level underwriter at the lending firm. The loan officer manually flagged the credit inquiry as a verified spousal joint venture, deliberately suppressing the automated fraud text messages that should have alerted me to the theft. The sheer viciousness of their combined strategy became terrifyingly clear. Nathan intended to finalize our divorce while quietly leaving this $2.5 million anvil chained to my ankle. The moment the judge stamped our separation decree, the predatory lending firm would invoke a standard default covenant triggered by the dissolution of our marital estate. They would bypass his hollow commercial firm and come directly after the primary guarantor. They would legally garnish my wages. They would seize my corporate pension. They would liquidate the unvested stock options I earned through 80-hour weeks at the bourbon conglomerate. Nathan and Lauren designed a flawless financial cage. They planned to bankrupt me with toxic debt while they sipped vintage champagne funded by the washed money resting in Virginia and her irrevocable trust. They truly believed they had engineered the perfect corporate murder. I sat back in the creaking vinyl chair, letting the silence of the motel room settle around me. A lesser woman would call an attorney weeping over the forged signature and begging a civil court judge for an emergency injunction. But fighting a predatory shadow bank in a civilian courtroom takes years. It drains resources and forces the victim into a prolonged defensive posture. I do not play defense. The golden rule of corporate acquisition dictates that whoever purchases the paper controls the fate of the debtor. If a faceless private equity firm holds this forged loan, I am a victim trapped in endless litigation. But if I own the loan, the dynamic shifts into absolute dominance. These shadow lenders operate on fast liquidity. They despise risk, and they hate holding distressed debt tied to a messy divorce. If an anonymous corporate entity approached them, offering to buy the high-risk portfolio for a swift cash payout, they would sell the paper in a heartbeat. I looked at the secure banking portal for Apex compliance. The holding company I established was untraceable and fully insulated from my marital footprint. I possessed the capital necessary to purchase this debt. By utilizing my hidden war chest, I could acquire the $2.5 million note. I would officially transform from a discarded wife into Nathan and his primary secured creditor. I would hold the legal lien on his commercial firm. I would hold the cross-collateralized assets tied to the loan. I would become the judge, the jury, and the executioner of his entire fraudulent bloodline. I cracked my knuckles preparing to draft the preliminary acquisition inquiry to the lending firm. The thrill of the impending slaughter sharpened my senses. Just as my fingers touched the keys, my encrypted phone vibrated against the laminate desk. It was not a corporate alert. It was a notification from an obscure local news aggregator. Lauren was growing incredibly impatient. She was tired of hiding in the shadows of the equestrian estate waiting for Nathan to finalize the divorce. She wanted her high society debut immediately. Unable to secure her crown through patience, she and Virginia decided to accelerate the process by launching a coordinated public attack. They were initiating a vicious smear campaign across Louisville, aiming to destroy my reputation before I ever had the chance to step into a courtroom. The digital warfare was escalating, moving from the hidden ledgers directly into the brutal arena of public opinion. The glowing screen of my cellular phone pulsed with relentless notifications illuminating the dark corners of the roadside motel room. Lauren and Virginia were escalating their digital warfare, saturating the local Kentucky social feeds with venomous whispers about my character. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to expend all my energy frantically denying their fabricated rumors, trying to salvage a reputation they had already poisoned. I reached over and placed the phone face down on the laminate desk. A seasoned tactician does not waste ammunition shooting at shadows. Social media gossip is a temporary nuisance, but a forged $2.5 million construction loan is an eternal financial death sentence. To execute this corporate slaughter, I needed to control the paper. If a standard banking institution held Nathan and his forged loan, I would be trapped in a decade of defensive civil litigation. I would spend years paying attorneys to prove my signature was fraudulent, while Nathan and his mistress lived comfortably off the stolen federal grant money hidden in his mother and her trust account. A victim waits for a judge to grant them justice. An executioner buys the guillotine and drops the blade themselves. But purchasing a high-yield predatory debt portfolio requires immense liquid capital. A compliance auditor earning a standard corporate salary does not typically possess millions of dollars in disposable cash. I refused to rely on convenient inheritances or blind luck. I relied solely on my own history of hunting corrupt men. 20 years ago, the sweltering heat of a Kentucky summer hung heavy over my father and his modest hardware store. I can still vividly recall the scent of fresh-cut pine boards mixing with the metallic tang of rusting nails. My father was a quiet, hard-working man who took immense pride in his inventory. He spent 3 decades building a business that served the local community. Then the commercial developer arrived. He wore a crisp seersucker suit and a condescending smile, driving a luxury vehicle paid for by the exploitation of others. The developer utilized a web of predatory zoning loopholes and staggering legal fees to slowly suffocate my father and his modest enterprise. I watched from behind the cash register as my father wiped sweat from his brow, his calloused hands trembling as he signed the final bankruptcy papers. The developer stripped an honest man of his dignity simply because he wanted the corner lot for a new shopping plaza. That specific afternoon forged the iron in my spine. It birthed a lethal, icy hatred for arrogant men who steal from the working class to subsidize their country club dues. It is the exact reason I chose a career in financial compliance. I learned the intricate language of ledgers and tax codes so I could systematically dismantle predators from the inside out. 5 years ago, that specialized knowledge yielded an unexpected and highly lucrative harvest. While conducting a routine quarterly audit for my global bourbon conglomerate, I uncovered a sophisticated supply chain discrepancy. An international shipping vendor was falsifying customs tariffs and systematically defrauding my employer out of tens of millions of dollars. Instead of reporting the anomaly to my internal corporate supervisors, who might have quietly swept the scandal under the rug to protect their vendor relationships, I compiled a pristine encrypted dossier. I bypassed the corporate hierarchy entirely and submitted the evidence directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission under the Federal Whistleblower Protection Program. The ensuing government investigation was swift and devastating. The international vendor was forced to pay staggering federal penalties. Under the parameters of the Dodd-Frank Act, the Regulatory Commission awards whistleblowers a significant percentage of the recovered funds. My payout was a multi-million-dollar bounty. The federal authorities wired the untraceable funds into a secure offshore holding account registered under a designated alias. Nathan never knew the money existed. My husband preferred to view me as a diligent, predictable corporate employee. He derived his fragile sense of superiority from believing he was the primary financial force in our marriage, despite his constant cash flow issues. He loved boasting about his commercial development firm while I quietly drove a modest sedan and packed my own lunches. He never once suspected that his unassuming wife slept next to a fortune capable of buying and selling his entire fabricated empire 10 times over. I turned my attention back to the corporate laptop resting on the motel desk. I initiated the secure cryptographic keys required to access my hidden whistleblower wealth. The banking portal loaded, displaying a 7-figure balance that had sat dormant gathering interest for half a decade. This secret capital was the ultimate weapon, and the time had come to unsheath it. I established a secure digital pipeline, routing the necessary funds directly into the operating accounts of Apex Compliance LLC. The holding company was no longer just an empty shell registered in a blind jurisdiction. It was now a heavily capitalized financial entity fully equipped to purchase distressed commercial debt. I watched the progress bar fill as the wire transfer cleared the international clearinghouses. The transaction completed with a sharp, satisfying chime from the computer speakers. I closed the banking portal and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the motel window. The exhausted, discarded wife who had stood on a porch holding a garbage bag of cheap suits was entirely gone. The woman staring back at me possessed cold, unwavering eyes and a posture carved from solid stone. I was a heavily armed apex predator, preparing to systematically dismantle a criminal syndicate disguised as a high society Kentucky family. I spent the next several hours compiling the forensic data into a lethal digital armory. I organized the routing numbers from the stolen urban development grant, the time-stamped photographs of the mistress receiving a luxury vehicle, and the metadata proving Nathan forged my signature on the toxic construction loan. I secured my digital perimeter, establishing encrypted firewalls around Apex compliance to ensure my identity remained a flawless secret. Nathan and his mother believed they had successfully isolated me. They thought their coordinated social media attacks and fraudulent trusts would force me into a silent, humiliating retreat. They were operating under the delusion that they held the high ground simply because they changed the locks on a house. I closed my laptop and packed it carefully into my leather briefcase. The preparatory phase of this conflict was officially concluded. My proxy lawyers were standing by, awaiting my direct authorization to approach the shadow lending firm. The predatory bankers holding Nathan and his forged note were desperate to offload their distressed assets before the impending municipal audits exposed the underlying fraud. Apex Compliance was stepping into the arena, offering them a swift, highly profitable exit strategy. Meanwhile, Lauren was growing increasingly impatient. Her thirst for public validation and high society status was creating severe fractures in their careless alliance. Her relentless online smear campaign was generating the exact type of chaotic noise I needed to mask my financial maneuvers. Her arrogance was a profound vulnerability, and I planned to use her desperate need for attention as the perfect distraction while I finalized the purchase of their financial execution block. The smell of roasted espresso beans mingled with the scent of impending rain outside the window of the secluded Louisville coffee shop. I sat in a dimly lit corner booth facing the door. My encrypted laptop rested open on the reclaimed wood table. On the screen, a secure text channel blinked with live updates from my lead proxy counsel, Carter. He was sitting in a high-rise conference room in Chicago, staring down the executives of the shadow lending firm that underwrote Nathan and his forged construction loan. These private equity lenders operated in the murky gray areas of commercial finance. They thrived on high-yield returns from desperate men, but they shared one universal weakness. They possessed a severe allergy to federal scrutiny. Carter was currently leveraging that exact fear. He informed their managing partners that impending municipal audits regarding the downtown revitalization project would soon expose severe irregularities in the development firm they had financed. If the government traced the embezzled grant money back to their underwriting department, the resulting subpoenas would freeze their entire lending portfolio. Carter offered them a swift, clean exit. Apex Compliance LLC would purchase the distressed high-risk paper, removing the toxic asset from their ledgers before the federal inspectors started asking questions. The negotiations were brutal but predictably brief. Shadow banks prefer fast liquidity over prolonged legal exposure. My screen chimed softly. Carter sent a single line of text confirming the final purchase price. They were willing to offload the $2.5 million debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. I opened my offshore banking portal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I verified the routing numbers and the legal assignment of the debt covenants. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter heat ground me in the present moment. With a sharp, satisfying click of the mouse, I authorized the wire transfer. The progress bar filled the screen and vanished. Apex Compliance officially owned the note. The magnitude of that single digital transaction sent a quiet hum of power through my veins. I was no longer a betrayed spouse waiting for a judge to divide our furniture. I was the primary secured creditor of my husband and his entire fraudulent enterprise. I held the legal lien on his commercial development firm. I possessed the right to dictate his operational cash flow. But the crown jewel of this acquisition was buried deep within the cross-collateralization schedules of the loan agreement. To secure the predatory capital, Nathan had quietly pledged more than just his business assets. He had attached the deed to Virginia and her prized ancestral estate. For years, my mother-in-law had lorded that sprawling colonial property over me. She hosted lavish garden parties on the manicured lawns, boasting about her deep bluegrass roots and her unshakable social standing. She delighted in reminding me that my family rented a modest duplex while her bloodline inherited acres of premium Kentucky real estate. She sneered at my working-class background, believing her inherited brick and mortar made her untouchable. The irony was exquisite. The very woman who mercilessly mocked my upbringing was now legally residing on property entirely owned by my holding company. She was sleeping under a roof that I could foreclose upon the second her son defaulted on his payment. The financial noose was successfully braided and secured. I simply needed to wait for the arrogant fools to proudly slip their own necks into the loop. While I methodically tightened the legal snare Lauren was busy performing for an audience of strangers, the 28-year-old luxury real estate agent possessed zero tactical patience. She craved immediate high society validation, and her thirst for public attention was creating a severe structural vulnerability in their careless alliance. I opened a secondary browser window to monitor her public social media profiles. Lauren was accelerating her digital smear campaign, attempting to rewrite reality to justify her new lifestyle. She posted a glossy photograph of herself standing on the veranda of the local equestrian club, holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne. The caption beneath the image was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. She wrote about the exhausting burden of dealing with toxic, unstable people who refuse to let go of the past, praising her own resilience in finding true love despite the obstacles. Her followers flooded the comment section with blind praise. Virginia chimed in using her personal account to leave a string of heart emojis, adding a public reply about how blessed she felt to finally have a classy, refined woman joining the family circle. They were feeding off each other, constructing a fabricated, aristocratic narrative while trying to bury my reputation under a mountain of digital dirt. A foolish person would have engaged in the comments section defending their honor against the slander. A tactician simply collects the ammunition. I captured high-resolution screenshots of every single post, every passive-aggressive comment, and every fabricated claim regarding my mental health. I extracted the permanent, uniform resource locators and the timestamp metadata archiving the evidence into a pristine legal dossier. The Kentucky Real Estate Commission enforces a strict code of professional ethics for licensed brokers. Engaging in public defamation and coordinated harassment are severe violations of that code. Lauren thought she was cementing her status among the bourbon elite. She did not realize she was actively authoring the very lawsuit that would permanently strip her of her broker license. I cataloged her vanity, preparing a libel case that would obliterate her earning potential the moment the dust settled from the federal fallout. Her impatience was a gift. It kept Nathan distracted managing her social demands, while he remained entirely oblivious to the silent predator circling his business. My phone vibrated against the wooden table, pulling my attention away from the digital circus. The caller identification displayed the name of my retained divorce counsel, Attorney Mitchell. I answered the call, expecting a routine update on the initial court filings. Mitchell did not offer a standard greeting. His tone was sharp, laced with a mixture of professional disbelief and dark amusement. He just sent over the initial settlement demands, Mitchell stated, the rustle of heavy paper echoing through the speaker. I have seen arrogant opening bids before, Holly, but your husband is operating on a terrifying level of delusion. I closed my laptop, sliding it into my leather briefcase. Tell me the terms. Nathan and his representation drafted a total surrender agreement, Mitchell explained. He is demanding you sign a comprehensive waiver, relinquishing any and all claims to the marital estate. He wants you to forfeit your right to investigate the depleted joint savings accounts. In exchange, he is generously offering to drop the fabricated domestic complaints he filed with your corporate human resources department. He claims he is willing to walk away quietly if you simply sign the bottom line today and hand him the keys to the kingdom. I stepped out of the coffee shop into the humid afternoon air. The audacity of his strategy was brilliant in its sheer cruelty. Nathan believed the fake police report had effectively paralyzed my career. He assumed I was sitting in that cheap motel room terrified of losing my unvested corporate stock options. He was leveraging the very sabotage he orchestrated to extort my silence regarding the missing $540,000. He wanted me to look the other way while he washed the stolen federal grant money through his mother and her irrevocable trust. Mitchell continued reading from the predatory document. He also included a highly specific indemnity clause. He is demanding that the court award him sole, undisputed ownership of his commercial development firm, along with all its current operations. He insists he is taking on the burden of the business to spare you the stress of untangling complex commercial assets. A slow, cold smile broke across my face. The sheer beauty of his ignorance was breathtaking. Nathan wanted the family court judge to grant him 100% legal ownership of his commercial firm. He believed this maneuver would protect his future profits and his ongoing developments from my auditing reach. He had no idea that by aggressively claiming total ownership of the entity, he was simultaneously volunteering to absorb 100% of the corporate liabilities. He was demanding the court legally chain him to the federal grant embezzlement. He was insisting the judge tie his name permanently to the $2.5 million toxic construction loan, the very loan that I now owned. "Draft a response," I instructed, my voice steady and rich with anticipation. "Tell his lawyer we need to schedule an immediate meeting to review the surrender documents. Tell him I am exhausted, humiliated, and eager to sign whatever he puts in front of me just to make the corporate harassment stop." Mitchell paused, a low chuckle rumbling through the phone line. "You are going to let him claim the business on the record." "I am going to let him claim the rope," I replied, opening the door to my sedan. "I just need to help him tie the knot." The trap was fully constructed, and the bait was set. Nathan thought he was maneuvering me into a corner. He was eagerly marching toward the legal slaughterhouse, blind to the blade hovering just inches above his neck. With the settlement meeting scheduled, I prepared to step back into the light, setting the stage for a spectacular collision at the upcoming high society gala. The mahogany doors of the law office conference room sealed shut with a heavy, definitive click, isolating us in a chilled, sterile environment. Attorney Carter sat across from me. He possessed the calculating demeanor of a veteran litigator who viewed corporate divorce not as a legal proceeding, but as a ruthless blood sport. He had spent his entire career dissecting fraudulent spouses, but even he was astonished by the sheer audacity of the settlement demand resting on the polished glass table. Nathan had dispatched his legal counsel, a junior partner named Preston, to deliver the ultimatum. Preston wore a patronizing smirk, sliding the thick stack of premium bonded paper toward my side of the table. The document was a masterclass in narcissistic delusion. Nathan demanded a total surrender. He required me to sign a comprehensive waiver, forfeiting any legal right to investigate the depleted marital savings account or trace the missing $500,000. In exchange for my blind compliance, he graciously offered to withdraw the fabricated domestic violence complaint currently paralyzing my corporate career. Preston leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He outlined the stipulations with an air of unearned superiority. The centerpiece of the agreement focused on the commercial development firm. Preston emphasized that Nathan would assume sole, undisputed ownership of the business and its ongoing municipal projects. He framed this demand as a noble sacrifice, claiming Nathan was lifting the complex burden of commercial enterprise off the shoulders of his emotionally unstable wife. I stared at the dense legal paragraphs, keeping my facial expression carefully blank. The irony layered within those pages was exquisite. By demanding 100% ownership of the entity in front of a family court mediator, Nathan was willingly absorbing every single ounce of corporate risk. He was legally chaining his name to the federal grant embezzlement. He was cementing his direct liability for the $2.5 million predatory construction loan. He thought he was walking away with a gold mine while tossing me the scrap metal. To seal the trap, I needed to sell my defeat. I let my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my posture to mimic a woman crushed under the weight of unrelenting pressure. I stared at my hands, allowing a slight distinct tremor to shake my fingers. I reached into my purse, bypassing my premium fountain pens, and pulled out a cheap plastic ballpoint. It was cracked near the base, a discarded remnant from the roadside motel. As I pressed the tip against the signature line, the defective cartridge leaked a small pool of dark ink onto my index finger. I did not ask for a tissue. I simply wiped the stained skin onto the fabric of my faded skirt, projecting the image of an individual entirely drained of resources and dignity. Carter played his part flawlessly. He let out an audible sigh of staged frustration, rubbing his temples as if dealing with a hopeless client. He warned me, on the record, that signing the preliminary agreement was a terrible financial decision. He cautioned that I was giving away my leverage. I ignored his manufactured advice, whispering that I just wanted the corporate harassment to end so I could disappear in peace. I traced my name across the designated line, leaving a faint smudge of leaked ink near the margin. Preston snatched the signed document with a triumphant grin. He packed his leather briefcase and exited the room, believing he had just secured the victory of a lifetime for his client. He assumed he had outsmarted a highly trained auditor. Once the door closed, Carter and I dropped the theatrical act. The trembling in my hands ceased immediately. I grabbed a sanitized wipe from the credenza and cleaned the cheap ink from my skin. The bait was taken. Nathan had officially sworn on a legal record that the commercial firm and all its hidden sins belonged exclusively to him. I left the law office and returned to the obscure motel room for the final time. The tactical phase required one last digital maneuver before I stepped back into the public eye. I opened my encrypted laptop and began compiling a pristine, highly classified dossier. I gathered the geolocated timestamps, the forged signature metadata, and the exact routing numbers linking Nathan to the stolen federal urban development grants. The most crucial piece of intelligence was the destination of the washed funds. I meticulously mapped the financial pathway, connecting the commercial accounts directly to the irrevocable trust owned by Virginia. She had proudly plastered her name across the fraudulent accounts, seeking social validation while unknowingly painting a target on her own back. I accessed the secure portal for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. This specialized federal branch does not issue polite warnings or schedule convenient meetings. They freeze suspicious assets first and ask questions during the subsequent early morning raids. They are the apex predators of the financial ecosystem. I uploaded the encrypted dossier through their anonymous whistleblower tip line. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen, ensuring the data packets cleared the federal firewall. The submission confirmed with a subtle green check mark. The tripwire was officially primed. The federal algorithms are designed to monitor flagged accounts for erratic movement. The moment Nathan attempted to move a single dollar out of his mother and her trust, the system would detect the anomaly and lock the entire network down. They would choke off his financial blood supply in the blink of an eye. With the digital warfare complete, it was time to transition from the shadows to the physical battlefield. For weeks I had endured the social isolation engineered by Lauren in Virginia. They had poisoned my reputation among the Kentucky elite, spreading venomous rumors about my character across every country club in Louisville. They expected me to remain hidden, cowering in shame, while they celebrated their stolen wealth. The Kentucky Derby Eve Gala was approaching. It is the undisputed pinnacle of bluegrass society, an event characterized by strict exclusivity, designer fashion, and unbridled ego. Nathan, Lauren, and Virginia plan to use the gala as their grand high society debut, parading their fabricated aristocratic status in front of the local bourbon barons and equestrian elites. They intended to cement their victory in front of the wealthiest families in the state. I zipped my laptop into my briefcase and walked out of the motel, leaving the peeling wallpaper and stale air behind forever. I had an appointment with a premier tailor in the city. I was not going to attend the gala wearing the cheap, discarded suits Virginia had thrown onto my porch. I was preparing to arrive draped in unyielding power. The trap was fully armed. The federal authorities were holding the leash. My husband was blindly counting down the hours until his own destruction, reveling in the false security of a signed surrender document. He thought he had erased me from his narrative. I just needed to look him in the eye when the timer reached 0. I steered my car toward the heart of the city, feeling the hum of the engine beneath my hands. The silent phase of my compliance audit was over. It was time to deliver the final report. I was holding a crystal glass of 12-year-old bourbon in a ballroom full of Kentucky elite when my husband handed me a blue folder that was supposed to end my life. 2 weeks before he publicly served me those divorce papers, $540,000 quietly disappeared from our joint account. His mother was on the receiving end. He thought the public humiliation would break me. He forgot I hunt corporate fraud for a living. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire fraudulent existence here on Sarah Told Stories, I want to know where you are watching from and how old you are in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to financially outsmart a toxic family who tried to leave you with nothing. The Kentucky Derby Eve Gala reigns as the undisputed crown jewel of Louisville high society. Hosted in a historic downtown ballroom boasting soaring vaulted ceilings and intricate gold leaf molding, the event is an exclusive sanctuary for the bourbon aristocracy. The air inside the Grand Hall carries a heavy, intoxicating blend of imported French perfume and the sharp, oaky scent of rare, aged whiskey. Thousands of deep red roses cascade from crystal vases resting on crisp linen tablecloths. It is a venue where generational pedigrees are fiercely protected and human value is calculated strictly by the size of your investment portfolio. For a commercial developer looking to cement his status among the elite, securing a premium table at this specific gathering is the ultimate victory. Nathan orchestrated their arrival to ensure maximum visibility. He stood near the edge of the polished wooden dance floor, holding a crystal tumbler of reserve bourbon, projecting the aura of a self-made titan. Beside him, Lauren paraded her new lifestyle for the flashing cameras of the local society photographers. She tore a $5,000 custom fascinator hat, an absurd, towering architectural monstrosity of dyed peacock feathers and structured silk netting. The headpiece was designed to demand attention, a glaring beacon of unearned luxury. Virginia sat at their reserved table holding court with a group of wealthy horse breeders. A heavy diamond tennis bracelet glittered on her wrist, sparkling under the brilliant light of the overhead chandeliers. They laughed with their peers, sipping expensive champagne paid for by stolen federal urban development grants. They genuinely believed their coordinated smear campaigns had erased my existence, leaving them free to rule their stolen kingdom. I stepped through the gilded double doors of the ballroom right as the jazz orchestra began a slow melodic tune. The crisp Kentucky night air swirled in behind me, rustling the heavy silk of my dress. I did not arrive looking like the isolated, ruined alcoholic they had meticulously painted me to be in their digital gossip circles. I was draped in a tailored emerald gown that swept gracefully against the marble floor. The rich, dark green fabric caught the ambient light, radiating a quiet, lethal control. I wore zero jewelry, keeping the focus entirely on my steady, unblinking gaze and my straight, unwavering posture. The transformation rippled through the room with stunning speed. The polite chatter nearest the entryway faltered and died. The sudden quiet spread outward like a stone dropped into a still pond, silencing the clinking glasses and the superficial laughter. Hundreds of guests who had spent the past month reading Lauren and her fabricated social media posts turned their heads to stare. They expected a fragile, weeping victim to crawl into the room, begging for her husband to return. Instead, they found themselves looking at a predator walking confidently into her natural hunting ground. Virginia spotted me from her seat. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her heavy makeup looking like a pale theatrical mask. Her inherited Southern composure shattered. She stood up so fast her chair scraped sharply against the hardwood floor. She flagged down a passing private security officer, pointing a trembling, manicured finger in my direction. She demanded the guard remove the hostile trespasser immediately, citing private guest lists and uninvited disruptions. The security officer took a hesitant step forward, but before he could reach me, the chief event organizer intercepted him. The organizer, a stern woman holding a digital tablet, hurried over to Virginia with a look of profound disbelief. Virginia raised her chin, preparing to deliver a lecture on high society etiquette. The organizer did not let her speak. She informed my mother-in-law in a voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear that the woman standing by the doors was not a trespasser. She explained that Apex Compliance, LLC, was the primary platinum sponsor underwriting the entire gala, paying for the open bar, the jazz orchestra, and the venue itself. I was their guest of honor. Virginia slumped back into her chair, her jaw hanging slack. She had spent the last hour boasting to her friends about her flawless financial planning. Now she sat paralyzed, realizing the very event she used to showcase her wealth was funded by the daughter-in-law she had discarded on a porch. I walked slowly across the ballroom floor. The crowd parted seamlessly, allowing me a clear path to their premium table. I did not rush. I let the silence stretch, ensuring the heavy weight of my presence settled over their shoulders. Nathan stood frozen near the dance floor, the amber liquid in his glass trembling slightly as his hands betrayed his internal panic. Lauren reached up to touch the edge of her ridiculous feathered hat, her eyes darting nervously around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. I stopped mere inches from my husband. I did not throw a drink in his face. I did not raise my voice to scream about his infidelity or his stolen wealth. Theatrical tantrums are the desperate tools of the powerless. A true compliance auditor delivers destruction with a whisper. I leaned in close, breathing in the sharp scent of his expensive cologne. I kept my voice pitched to a low, chilling register, ensuring only he and his mistress could hear my words over the soft playing of the jazz band. I recited a sequence of 12 digits. It was not a random string of numbers. It was the exact routing sequence for the offshore Cayman Island accounts where he had temporarily parked the embezzled government capital. I recited the corresponding SWIFT code for the International Clearinghouse. I finished by whispering the exact timestamp of his final fraudulent wire transfer down to the specific second. Nathan stopped breathing. The crystal tumbler slipped from his grip, landing on the edge of the linen table with a dull thud, spilling premium bourbon across the white fabric. The arrogant developer facade peeled away, exposing the raw primal terror of a man realizing he was standing on a trap door. He knew those numbers. He knew nobody outside of his corrupt lending syndicate was supposed to possess that data. The realization that I had mapped his hidden digital network struck him with physical force. Lauren blinked rapidly, her painted lips parting in confusion. She lacked the financial literacy to understand the routing codes, but she recognized the sheer horror radiating from the man standing next to her. She instinctively took a step back, distancing herself from the sudden invisible threat. "You have 48 hours until we sit down in front of the family court judge," I whispered, locking my eyes onto his terrified stare. "The clock is ticking, Nathan." I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on the shattered trio and walked gracefully toward the exit. The jazz orchestra transitioned into a new upbeat tempo, trying to mask the stifling tension left in my wake. I stepped out of the historic ballroom and into the cool, humid breeze of the Kentucky spring night. The bait was delivered flawlessly. Nathan was currently suffocating under the crushing weight of his exposed crimes. He knew I held the coordinates to his offshore sanctuary. He would spend the rest of the night pacing his leased equestrian estate, consumed by a blinding, frantic need to protect his stolen money. He would not sleep. He would not consult his attorney. He would attempt to move the funds out of his mother and her irrevocable trust the very next morning, hoping to outrun my forensic trail. He was a desperate rat cornered in a maze searching for an exit. I smiled, walking toward my waiting car, knowing his panic sprint for survival would send him tripping straight through the invisible federal wire I had meticulously strung across his path. The morning after the charity gala broke over the Louisville skyline, casting long, pale shadows across the downtown commercial district. Nathan did not go home to sleep. He sat in his plush leather office chair, staring blankly at the dual monitors resting on his mahogany desk. His custom-tailored tuxedo shirt was wrinkled, and the silk bow tie lay discarded on the carpeted floor. His hands shook as he gripped a lukewarm cup of bitter black coffee. The 12 digits I had whispered the night before echoed relentlessly in his mind, ringing like a funeral bell. He knew his offshore sanctuary was compromised. He realized the tropical accounts he planned to use for his escape were no longer safe harbors. His survival instincts demanded immediate action. He needed to extract the stolen capital from his mother and her trust before I could file a formal discovery motion during our upcoming divorce hearing. If he could shift the $540,000 into a decentralized, untraceable digital wallet, he believed he could still outrun the impending municipal audits and my forensic reach. Drops of cold perspiration gathered on his forehead. He wiped his brow with a trembling wrist. He launched his encrypted web browser, navigating directly to the high net worth wealth management portal. He entered the complex credentials for the irrevocable trust. The screen loaded, displaying the stolen marital savings resting undisturbed in the primary ledger. He breathed a deep sigh of temporary relief, believing he still possessed a narrow window of opportunity to salvage his fraudulent empire. He initiated a domestic wire transfer, selecting the option to move the entire balance in a single transaction. He typed the destination routing sequence, his fingers slipping on the plastic keyboard due to the slick condensation coating his palms. He verified the numbers and moved his cursor over the submit button. This is the exact moment his profound ignorance of high-level finance sealed his fate. Moving $500,000 out of a locked, irrevocable trust is not akin to paying a standard utility bill. It is a highly scrutinized financial event governed by stringent federal banking regulations. Furthermore, when a verified corporate auditor files an anonymous tip with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division detailing exact account coordinates, the government places a silent digital tripwire over the funds. The authorities wait patiently for the suspect to touch the money. The moment the capital attempts to move it provides the final, undeniable proof of intent to launder illicit assets. Nathan clicked the mouse. The loading wheel spun on his monitor. It spun for what felt like an eternity, rotating in a mesmerizing, repetitive circle. He tapped his leather shoe frantically against the floorboards, his heart pounding a rapid, frantic rhythm against his ribs. Then the screen refreshed. The banking interface did not produce a standard confirmation receipt. A stark crimson banner materialized across the display, illuminating his pale face in an eerie red glow. The text was blunt and unforgiving, stating the transaction was denied and the account was frozen pursuant to a federal directive. He stared at the warning message, his lungs refusing to draw in oxygen. The money was locked down under severe suspicion of money laundering. He was trapped. While Nathan stared at his ruined computer monitor, Virginia was preparing to secure her own social downfall across town. She arrived at an elite bluegrass horse park that afternoon, wearing a pastel linen sundress and a wide-brimmed designer sun hat. The open-air auction pavilion smelled of fresh hay, polished leather, and expensive French perfume. Virginia did not know how to ride a horse. She possessed zero knowledge of equine bloodlines or stable management. She viewed thoroughbreds merely as high society props, living accessories designed to validate her fabricated aristocratic identity. She wanted to purchase a prized yearling to flaunt in front of the local breeders, proving she belonged in their exclusive tax bracket. She sought to wash the perceived stain of my working-class background from her family tree by buying her way into the inner circle of Kentucky wealth. The auctioneer rattled off numbers at a breakneck pace, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. Virginia raised her numbered paddle triumphantly, placing the winning bid on a beautiful chestnut filly. Her country club peers offered polite, supportive applause. She marched toward the cashier desk with her chin held high, presenting her premium platinum credit card. The card drew its equity directly from the trust account she assumed was a fortress of endless capital. The clerk processed the magnetic strip through the terminal. The machine emitted a sharp, harsh beep. The transaction was declined. Virginia offered a condescending laugh, waving her hand and blaming the faulty machinery. She demanded the clerk input the numbers manually, insisting her credit limit was boundless. The young woman behind the desk complied, typing the digits with practiced speed before shaking her head. The system returned a strict hold code. The clerk picked up the telephone to call the Merchant Services Department, while Virginia tapped her manicured nails impatiently against the wooden counter. The bank representative on the other end of the line informed the clerk of the severe account status. The clerk lowered the receiver, looking at Virginia with a mixture of pity and discomfort. She announced, loud enough for the neighboring socialites to hear, that the financial institution had seized the equity lines under a federal mandate. The polite chatter around the cashier desk abruptly ceased. The wealthy horse breeders stopped discussing bloodlines and turned to watch the spectacle. They exchanged knowing, judgmental glances. The social whisper network ignited instantly, carrying the news of the declined transaction across the pavilion. Virginia stood frozen, her counterfeit pearls feeling like a heavy iron chain around her neck. She was publicly stripped of her fake crown, reduced to a humiliated fraud in front of the very audience she desperately craved to impress. She turned and fled the pavilion, walking briskly to her vehicle, while the sounds of muted laughter followed her retreat. Simultaneously, the federal auditors executed their mandate on Nathan and his commercial development firm. When the red warning banner appeared on his trust portal, he frantically logged into his business banking interface, hoping to salvage his operational capital to pay his staff. The screens mirrored the exact same crimson warnings. The investigation into the embezzled urban development grants authorized the immediate seizure of all corporate assets. The federal government placed a hard lock on his payroll accounts, his vendor lines, and his operational escrow. The financial blood supply was entirely severed. His firm could not issue paychecks to his remaining employees, his construction suppliers would not receive payment for their materials, and most critically, he possessed zero liquid capital to service the predatory construction loan he had forged in my name. The walls of his inescapable cage rapidly closed in, squeezing every remaining ounce of hope from his mind. He was a ruined man, sitting in a leased office overseeing a bankrupt, fraudulent enterprise. Consumed by sheer panic, Nathan dialed his divorce attorney. Preston answered the call, expecting to discuss routine settlement logistics and final signature requirements. Instead, he listened to his client babble hysterically about banking glitches, frozen funds, and locked corporate accounts. Nathan begged the lawyer to file an emergency injunction to release the money before our final hearing, scheduled just 3 days away. He framed the issue as a minor administrative error, desperate to hide the criminal reality from his own legal counsel. Preston, acting on incomplete and falsified information, drafted a frantic motion to the family court. The attorney assumed the asset freeze was a standard marital dispute tactic, initiated by a bitter spouse fighting over a joint checking account. He requested an immediate judicial intervention to unlock the trust, claiming the freeze was causing undue financial hardship on his client. They were preparing to walk directly into the courthouse blind. Preston and his client believed they were fighting a simple domestic battle over shared assets. They had zero comprehension that Apex Compliance held their toxic debt. They did not realize that federal agents were currently compiling their indictments. They were marching into the legal execution chamber stripped of their stolen wealth, devoid of leverage, and entirely out of time. The grand finale of their deception was set to unfold under the bright, unforgiving lights of the judicial system. The morning air in downtown Louisville carried a crisp chill as I walked up the wide concrete steps of the Jefferson County Family Court. The towering limestone pillars cast long shadows across the plaza, projecting an aura of institutional authority. I wore a tailored charcoal suit, projecting the quiet discipline of a senior corporate auditor. Beside me, Attorney Carter walked with the measured pace of a seasoned litigator, holding a slim leather briefcase. We bypassed the metal detectors and rode the crowded elevator to the 4th floor in silence. I did not feel the typical anxiety that plagues individuals entering a divorce proceeding. My pulse beat a slow, steady rhythm. We took our seats at the petitioner table inside the cavernous courtroom. A few moments later, the heavy oak doors swung open. Nathan strode down the center aisle. He wore a bespoke navy pinstripe suit and a silk tie projecting the polished veneer of a highly successful commercial developer. He rolled his shoulders back, attempting to exude an unshakable swagger. To the untrained eye, he looked like a wealthy titan of industry, ready to finalize a minor contractual annoyance. But an auditor trains their eyes to spot the microscopic fractures in a facade. I noticed the faint sheen of perspiration gathering along his hairline, his jaw clenched and unclenched in rapid succession. The knuckles of his right hand were pale as he gripped his leather portfolio. He was suffocating under the crushing pressure of frozen bank accounts and severed credit lines. He genuinely believed that securing the final decree today would grant him full access to my corporate pension. He intended to leverage my unvested stock options to appease the shadow lenders breathing down his neck. His entire survival strategy hinged on my passive compliance. In the wooden pews of the public gallery directly behind the defense table sat Virginia. She clutched a quilted designer purse tightly in her lap. Her posture was rigidly straight, mimicking the aristocratic poise of the bluegrass elite she so desperately worshipped. Just 24 hours prior, she had stood in a high society equestrian pavilion, enduring the profound humiliation of a declined credit transaction. Yet here she sat, attempting to project an image of untouchable superiority. She locked her gaze onto me, narrowing her eyes with an unfiltered, venomous hatred. She blamed me for the sudden evaporation of her son and his financial stability, refusing to acknowledge the criminal origin of their wealth. I met her glare with blank indifference. The bailiff called the room to order as the judge entered and took his seat at the elevated bench. The magistrate adjusted his reading glasses, scanning the thick stack of settlement documents submitted by Nathan and his legal counsel. Attorney Preston stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He wore a smug, self-satisfied grin, believing he had engineered the perfect legal victory against a defenseless woman. He cleared his throat, ready to deliver a performance designed to praise his client and humiliate me on the public record. "Your Honor," Preston began, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet courtroom, "my client seeks to expedite this separation to minimize the emotional toll on all parties involved. We have submitted a comprehensive settlement agreement that demonstrates his profound generosity. Nathan recognizes that his soon-to-be ex-wife is currently facing severe personal and professional struggles. Her recent leave of absence from her corporate position highlights a tragic instability. Therefore, my client is stepping up to shoulder the heaviest financial burdens of this estate." Preston gestured grandly toward Nathan, who offered the judge a solemn, noble nod. To ensure a clean break, Preston continued, "Nathan is volunteering to assume 100% legal ownership and total operational liability for his commercial development firm. He will absorb all outstanding corporate debts, vendor obligations, and municipal contracts. He is asking for nothing from her in return regarding this business. He wishes to shield her from the complex, rigorous demands of commercial finance so she can focus on her own recovery. We request the court accept this surrender and finalize the decree today." The dramatic irony woven into Preston and his arrogant speech was exquisite. He stood in a court of law bragging about his client taking on the commercial firm. He was proudly asking the judge to legally chain his client to the $250,000 federal grant embezzlement. He was actively boasting about assuming the toxic $2.5 million construction loan. He had zero comprehension that the very woman he was painting as an unstable, fragile victim currently owned that exact predatory debt. He was begging the court to hand his client the rope. The judge frowned, looking over the top of his glasses at the lopsided agreement. "The terms outlined in the submitted paperwork stripped me of my home, my savings, and any claim to the commercial business." He turned his attention to the petitioner table, looking directly at me. The magistrate possessed a reputation for fairness, and the sheer imbalance of the settlement clearly troubled his judicial instincts. "This is a highly unusual surrender," the judge stated, his voice firm and questioning. "You are agreeing to walk away from a significant marital estate with virtually nothing. You are forfeiting your right to financial discovery regarding the missing liquid assets. The court needs to ensure you are not acting under duress. Do you fully comprehend the terms of this document, and do you accept this settlement as written?" The courtroom fell into a heavy, expectant silence. Nathan shifted his weight, his eyes burning into the side of my face. Virginia leaned forward in the gallery, holding her breath. They were waiting for me to bow my head, whisper my compliance, and sign away my life. They expected the working-class girl to shrink under the institutional pressure. I placed my hands flat against the polished wooden table and stood up. I did not rush. I smoothed the lapels of my charcoal suit. I lifted my chin, maintaining a posture of unwavering authority. I did not look at Nathan or his grinning lawyer. I fixed my gaze entirely on the magistrate seated above us. The quiet, compliant wife vanished, leaving only the lethal precision of a senior compliance auditor in her wake. "No, Your Honor," I stated, my voice ringing clear and steady through the cavernous space. "I do not accept the terms of this settlement. I cannot, in good conscience, allow the court to validate the transfer of these specific business entities or authorize this division of property." Preston dropped his smug smile, his brow furrowing in sharp irritation. He opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him instantly. The magistrate leaned forward, sensing the sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. "Why do you object to the surrender?" the judge asked. "Because the assets outlined in this document are not merely marital property," I replied, locking eyes with the judge. The commercial development firm, the linked financial accounts, and the irrevocable trust holding our missing marital funds are currently classified as active federal crime scenes. A shocked gasp echoed from the gallery. Nathan turned the color of wet ash. Right on cue, Attorney Carter unlatched the brass clasps of his heavy leather briefcase. He reached inside and pulled out a single, devastatingly thick black folder. He stepped forward and dropped the dossier directly onto the polished wooden edge of the judge and his elevated bench. The heavy thud resonated like a final striking gavel. The sound severed the last remaining thread of Nathan and his false security. His carefully constructed illusion of aristocratic dominance fractured into 1,000 irreparable pieces right there on the courtroom floor. The arrogant developer who had spent the last month orchestrating my downfall was now staring directly at the physical manifestation of his own demise. He looked at the black folder, recognizing the sheer volume of forensic evidence stacked inside. The trap was sprung. The execution had officially begun. The heavy black folder landed on the polished mahogany bench with a resounding thud echoing through the cavernous courtroom. The magistrate adjusted his reading glasses, looking down at the dense stack of forensic evidence. He opened the cover, revealing hundreds of pages of pristine data transaction logs and digital routing histories. The courtroom remained encased in a suffocating silence. Nathan stared at the folder, his polished developer facade fracturing into raw terror. He realized his estranged wife had not spent the last month weeping in a roadside motel. She had spent every single hour building his execution block. I stood tall at the petitioner table, projecting the cold authority of a senior compliance auditor. I directed the attention of the court to the first index tab. I explained the exact mechanics of the $2.5 million construction loan Nathan acquired just days prior to serving me the divorce papers. I methodically outlined the predatory nature of the shadow lending syndicate, detailing the staggering 25% interest rate. I guided the judge through the encrypted liabilities ledger, proving that Nathan secured this ruinous capital to replace stolen government funds before a municipal inspection. My husband shifted his weight, his expensive leather shoes squeaking against the floorboards. His attorney Preston flipped frantically through his own copy of the dossier, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the financial ruin his client had hidden from him. I requested the court examine page 4 of the exhibit. The digital scan displayed the final execution contract for the predatory loan. I pointed to the primary guarantor line. I explained the forensic metadata proving the signature was a clumsy forgery traced with a cheap blue ballpoint pen. I detailed how my immaculate credit score was hijacked to underwrite a toxic debt instrument. I turned my gaze toward the back of the courtroom. Sitting in the wooden pews of the gallery, trying to remain unnoticed, was Lauren. The luxury real estate agent wore a tailored silk dress, expecting to witness my humiliating defeat and celebrate her new high society ascension. Instead, she found herself pinned under the unforgiving glare of the judicial system. I addressed the judge, exposing the true architect of the loan. The metadata proved the initial draft originated from Lauren and her boutique brokerage computer. She did not merely facilitate an affair, she orchestrated the entire toxic financial transaction. I submitted the unredacted closing documents, proving she received a staggering 6-figure kickback for delivering a desperate borrower to the shadow lenders. I further detailed her utilization of a corrupt loan officer to intentionally suppress my premium identity monitoring alerts. Lauren shrank into the hard wooden bench, her painted lips parting in sheer horror as her lucrative career evaporated on the public record. Preston scrambled to his feet, his face pale and slick with sudden sweat. He attempted to mount a defense, stammering about unauthorized discovery and inadmissible corporate espionage. He claimed the private equity firm holding the note would never allow such confidential documents to be entered into a family court proceeding without a fight. The judge looked over his glasses, waiting for my response. I offered Preston a chilling, predatory smile. The shadow lending institution no longer holds any stake in this matter, I stated, my voice carrying clear and steady across the room. They recognized the severe liability of an impending municipal audit and chose a swift exit. They sold the distressed debt portfolio 3 days ago. I gestured to Attorney Carter, who unlatched a secondary compartment in his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet of heavily stamped federal parchment and handed it directly to Preston. The defense lawyer took the paper, his hands visibly shaking. Read the name of the primary secured creditor, I instructed. Preston scanned the legal assignment of debt. All color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped in a tailored suit. He read the name Apex Compliance, LLC. He knew the registration details of my anonymous holding company were contained within the black folder. The realization struck him with physical force. He dropped his expensive silver pen. It clattered loudly against the wooden table, rolling onto the floor. Preston took a slow, deliberate step away from his client, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout. I reached into my suit pocket and withdrew a crisp white envelope. I slid it across the table until it rested mere inches from Nathan and his trembling hands. You requested total operational ownership of your commercial firm today, I said, locking eyes with the man who tried to destroy me. You asked the court to bind you to every single corporate liability. As the sole proprietor of Apex Compliance, I am officially serving you with an immediate notice of corporate default. The exorbitant interest rate triggered an acceleration clause the moment you attempted to hide marital assets. Your business is entirely bankrupt, and I am calling the note due today. Nathan stared at the envelope, his lungs refusing to draw oxygen. He was paralyzed, realizing the working-class woman he discarded now owned his entire professional existence. But the execution was only half finished. I turned my back on the defense table and faced the public gallery. Virginia sat frozen in the front row, her counterfeit pearls resting heavily against her chest. She had spent the entire morning glaring at me, projecting an illusion of inherited aristocratic superiority. She believed her bloodline made her untouchable. I walked toward the low wooden partition separating the court from the gallery. I pulled a second legal document from Carter and his briefcase. Predatory shadow lenders do not issue millions of dollars based on charm, I explained, ensuring my voice reached every corner of the room. They require pristine collateral. To secure the funding, your son pledged more than just his hollow commercial firm. He utilized the cross-collateralization schedules to leverage clean residential real estate. Virginia stopped breathing, her eyes widened, searching my face for a mercy she would never find. I handed the thick foreclosure notice over the wooden railing. Virginia took it on pure reflex, her manicured fingers trembling. Your son forged the deeds pledging your prized ancestral estate to secure his toxic loan, I stated, dealing the final crushing blow. Since he is currently in default, the primary secured creditor possesses the legal right to seize all attached collateral. As the owner of Apex Compliance, I am serving you with an immediate notice of eviction. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property before the sheriff removes your belongings. Virginia looked down at the official court seal stamped on the eviction order. The devastating reality pulverized her fragile ego. The daughter-in-law she had relentlessly mocked, isolated, and treated like garbage was now her legal landlord. The sprawling bluegrass estate she used to validate her elite social status belonged entirely to me. She let out a horrifying, guttural shriek. The sound tore through the quiet courtroom, raw and agonizing. It was the wail of a narcissist watching her fabricated empire burn to ash. She clawed at her own chest, her breathing turning into ragged, hysterical sobs. She turned her venomous gaze toward the defense table, pointing a shaking finger at her own flesh and blood. "Fix this!" she screamed at Nathan, her voice cracking with pure terror. "You promised me the house was safe. You promised me she would walk away with nothing. Pay her the money right now." The pressure fractured Nathan in his remaining sanity. The polished developer facade crumbled, exposing a frantic, cornered animal. He looked at his weeping mother, the ruined mistress, shrinking in the back row, and the unforgiving gaze of the magistrate. His survival instinct short-circuited entirely. He believed he could still buy his way out of the slaughterhouse. "We have the money," Nathan shouted, his voice echoing frantically across the courtroom. He slammed his hands onto the defense table, leaning toward the judge in a blind, desperate panic. "We can pay the debt today, Your Honor. I do not need her toxic loan. I have $540,000 resting safely in my mother and her irrevocable trust. I can wire the capital to the holding company right this second to clear the arrears." The courtroom fell into a profound, stunning silence. I looked at the court reporter seated near the bench. Her fingers flew across the stenography machine, capturing every single syllable of his hysterical outburst. Nathan was so consumed by the need to save his aristocratic illusion that he forgot the core premise of his own divorce strategy. He just stood in a court of law on the official public record and admitted to hiding $500,000 of marital assets inside a secret trust. He voluntarily confessed to financial deception right in front of the presiding magistrate. He walked blindly into the final trap, believing his hidden cash was a life raft. He had no idea the federal tripwire was already primed, and the money he just promised to the court was currently locked inside a sprawling criminal investigation. The snare snapped shut, permanently sealing his fate. I allowed the suffocating silence to stretch across the courtroom. Nathan stood at the defense table with his chest heaving, his eyes wide and frantic, waiting for the magistrate to applaud his supposed financial solvency. My husband genuinely believed his spontaneous confession had saved him from the crushing weight of the toxic debt. He thought the hidden trust fund was his ultimate trump card. He failed to realize he had just proudly presented his own neck to the executioner. I looked at his pale, sweating face and let my mouth curve into a slow, terrifying, predatory smile. "This is called asset hiding, Your Honor," I stated, my voice echoing crisp and clear off the rich mahogany walls. I kept my tone perfectly measured, projecting the clinical detachment of a senior auditor presenting a final, damning report. But more importantly, it is called federal wire fraud. The magistrate lowered his reading glasses, his stern gaze shifting from my confident posture to the trembling man standing across the aisle. The judge did not need to ask for clarification. The thick black folder resting on his bench already contained the undeniable proof of the stolen government capital. Nathan had just voluntarily confirmed the exact location of the laundered money on the official judicial record. Right on cue, the heavy brass handles of the primary courtroom doors turned with a loud, definitive click. The double doors swung open, striking the rubber wall stops with a resounding thud. The standard court bailiffs stepped aside, making way for a highly coordinated entry. A specialized team marched into the judicial chamber, moving with rigid tactical efficiency. They did not wear traditional police uniforms. The lead investigators wore dark navy windbreakers emblazoned with the stark yellow lettering of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Flanking the federal agents were several local tactical police officers, their utility belts shifting with a heavy, intimidating clatter. The sudden influx of armed federal authority instantly shattered the polite, sterile atmosphere of the family court. Nathan froze. The residual color drained from his face, leaving his skin an unhealthy, sickly gray. His arrogant developer swagger dissolved, replaced by the primal, paralyzing terror of a trapped animal. He looked at Attorney Preston, desperately seeking a legal shield, but his defense counsel had already retreated. Preston gathered his expensive legal pads and stepped firmly away from the table, physically severing his proximity to a man about to be indicted for defrauding the United States government. The lead federal agent, a tall man with a severe, unyielding expression, bypassed the wooden partition and walked directly toward the defense table. He did not offer a polite greeting or ask for permission to interrupt the proceedings. He unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Nathaniel James," the agent announced, his deep voice filling every corner of the silent room, "you are under arrest for the embezzlement of federally backed urban development grants, extensive wire fraud, and the laundering of illicit funds through domestic trust accounts. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Nathan opened his mouth, but his vocal cords failed to produce a single sound. His knees buckled under the crushing gravity of the charges. Two tactical officers flanked him, grabbing his arms and forcing them behind his back. The loud metallic ratcheting of the steel handcuffs echoing sharply against the courthouse walls sounded like the locking mechanism of a vault. The grand illusion of his bluegrass commercial empire vanished in an instant, leaving behind a terrified, ruined felon facing decades in a federal penitentiary. While the agents secured my husband, a secondary scene of sheer desperation unfolded in the back rows of the public gallery. Lauren had watched the federal strike force flood the room. The luxury real estate agent who had spent the last month dreaming of high society galas and imported saddles recognized the lethal danger sweeping toward her. She slid out of the wooden pew, keeping her head bowed, attempting to quietly sneak toward the side emergency exit. She thought she could slip through the shadows and vanish before the authorities noticed her presence. Her expensive designer heels betrayed her, clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. A female tactical officer intercepted her, just inches from the heavy oak exit door. The officer blocked her path, raising a firm hand to halt her retreat. Lauren gasped, clutching her designer handbag to her chest, her painted lips trembling with sudden, overwhelming panic. "You cannot do this," Lauren whispered, her voice high and frantic. "I am just a real estate broker. I did not do anything wrong. I am just a spectator." "You are a documented co-conspirator," the officer replied, swiftly spinning Lauren around and pushing her hands against the cool wooden paneling of the door. "You are under arrest for commercial real estate fraud, deliberate facilitation of predatory lending practices, and conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud." The officer snapped the cuffs around her wrists. Lauren squeezed her eyes shut, weeping as the harsh reality of her ruined future set in. Her prestigious broker license, her curated social media presence, and her aspirations of joining the Kentucky elite were incinerated. She was destined to trade her tailored silk dresses for a standard-issue institutional jumpsuit. The final and most poetic execution of justice occurred in the center of the gallery. Virginia watched her golden son dragged away in steel bracelets. She watched the lavish lifestyle she had eagerly endorsed crumble into ash. The matriarch who had barred me from my own home, who had sneered at my working-class roots, refused to accept her own downfall. She stood up from the wooden bench, her face flushed red with indignant fury, clinging desperately to her fabricated aristocratic status. "Get your hands off him," Virginia shrieked, pointing a shaking manicured finger at the federal agents. "Do you know who we are? We are a respected family in this city. This is a massive misunderstanding orchestrated by a bitter, jealous woman. I demand you release my son right this instant." A senior IRS investigator approached her pew, holding a printed warrant bearing her exact name. He did not care about her country club memberships or her imaginary generational wealth. "Virginia James," the investigator stated, his tone devoid of any sympathy, "you are being detained for operating a fraudulent, irrevocable trust designed to harbor embezzled federal capital. Put your hands behind your back." Virginia recoiled as if she had been struck. She slapped the agent away, thrashing wildly in a pathetic attempt to resist detention. "I am not going anywhere," she wailed, her pristine Southern Belle facade shattering into an ugly, unhinged display of desperation. "You cannot touch me!" Two officers moved in, seizing her arms with practiced, unyielding force. As she struggled against their grip, her hands snagged on the collar of her pastel blouse. Her fingers caught the heavy string of oversized pearls resting around her neck. The sudden tension snapped the delicate cord. The counterfeit pearls broke free. Hundreds of heavy glass beads rained down, striking the hardwood floor with a sharp, chaotic clatter. They bounced and rolled under the wooden pews, scattering in every direction. The visual was a flawless metaphor for her entire existence. Her fake, fragile display of luxury was literally falling apart in a public courtroom, exposing the cheap, hollow reality underneath. The officers secured her wrists, drowning out her hysterical sobbing with the reading of her Miranda rights. The entire arrogant cabal was rounded up, secured, and forcefully marched down the center aisle. The heavy mahogany doors opened, revealing the final layer of my calculated trap. I had ensured this specific hearing was added to the public docket, and I had sent a pristine, anonymous summary of the impending federal raid to every major news outlet in Louisville. A sea of local press waited in the marble corridor. Flashing camera lights illuminated the dim hallway, capturing every humiliating second of their exit. Reporters shouted questions, thrusting microphones toward Nathan as he hung his head in profound shame. Virginia hid her tear-streaked face behind her shoulder, desperate to avoid the lenses that would broadcast her ruin across the state. Lauren wept openly, the flashing bulbs immortalizing the exact moment her high society dreams died. Their reputations were permanently and viciously eradicated in front of the very audience they had sought to impress. I stood at the petitioner table, listening to the chaotic noise fade as the authorities escorted them into the waiting transport vehicles outside. The courtroom settled back into a peaceful, empty silence. The magistrate sat at his bench, looking down at the black folder, shaking his head at the sheer magnitude of the deception that had just unraveled before his eyes. I calmly gathered my documents, sliding the forensic logs back into my leather briefcase. The brass clasps clicked shut, signaling the end of the operation. I looked up at the bench, offering a polite, respectful nod. "Thank you for your time today, Your Honor," I said smoothly. I turned and walked down the center aisle, my heels tapping a steady, victorious rhythm against the floorboards. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors, bypassing the lingering camera crews, and stepped out of the courthouse. The crisp, cool bluegrass air hit my face, carrying the faint, sweet scent of approaching rain. I stood on the limestone steps, looking out over the city skyline. I was unencumbered, financially secure, and entirely victorious. The toxic syndicate that tried to bury me was locked in federal holding cells, and I held the deeds to their entire kingdom. The demolition phase was officially complete. Now it was time to build a new empire from the dust of their ruined legacy, establishing a reign that no fraudulent developer or status-obsessed aristocrat could ever threaten again. 6 months evaporated with surgical precision. The dust from the courthouse arrest settled, leaving a pristine quiet in its wake. The federal justice system operates with a cold, mechanical rhythm that does not pause for high society pedigree or tailored suits. When an investigation is backed by undeniable digital evidence, verified routing numbers, and a voluntary confession recorded on a judicial transcript, there are no drawn-out sensational trials. There are only swift, unyielding plea deals, and the heavy finality of a judge delivering a mandatory sentence. My former husband is currently residing in a medium-security federal correctional institution. The arrogant commercial developer who thrived on projecting an illusion of elite wealth now lives a highly regulated existence, stripped of every luxury he once believed was his birthright. His bespoke navy pinstripe suits were replaced by standard-issue khaki uniforms. The man who used to swirl reserve bourbon in crystal tumblers while mocking the working class now starts his morning staring into a flimsy styrofoam cup filled with lukewarm tap water. He spends his days assigned to menial labor details, sweeping concrete floors and wiping down cafeteria tables. His charm holds zero currency within those concrete walls. He is a recognized federal felon, serving a strict, non-negotiable sentence for embezzlement and wire fraud, and there is no early parole for the crimes he committed against the government. Lauren experienced a different but equally devastating iteration of justice. The glamorous 28-year-old broker who orchestrated the predatory loan and dreamed of infiltrating the bluegrass aristocracy found her professional identity permanently eradicated. The Kentucky Real Estate Commission convened a rapid administrative hearing reviewing the detailed dossier of her complicity in the fraudulent property transactions. Her broker license was categorically revoked. She is banned for life from operating within any financial or property sector. To satisfy the staggering court-ordered restitution fines stemming from her involvement in the conspiracy, Lauren was forced to seek immediate employment. Her curated social media profiles were deleted, replacing her digital vanity with a stark, unforgiving reality. She currently works at a sprawling discount retail warehouse on the suburban outskirts of the city. She spends her grueling 10-hour shifts standing on aching feet under harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights, checking crumpled receipts as customers push their shopping carts out the exit doors. She wears an uncomfortable polyester vest, her days measured by the relentless beeping of barcode scanners. The high society elite she desperately tried to impress do not even recognize her when they walk past her register. But the ultimate poetic justice, the most profound dismantling of a fabricated legacy, belonged to Virginia. The 30-day eviction notice I served in the courtroom was executed flawlessly by my legal representation. When the deadline expired, Virginia was forced to pack her counterfeit pearls and her meager remaining possessions into a rented moving van. I did not attend the eviction, but my proxy attorneys ensured every legal parameter was strictly enforced. She was removed from the sprawling ancestral estate she used to validate her profound narcissism. I took physical possession of the property the very next morning. I stood on the expansive wraparound porch, the same spot where she had smugly barred my entry, and handed me a garbage bag of cheap suits. I did not keep the house. I had zero desire to live inside a monument to their deceit. I hired a commercial demolition crew. I stood near the edge of the gravel driveway with a cup of hot coffee and watched as the heavy yellow excavators rolled onto the manicured lawn. The mechanical steel jaws tore through the white columns and crushed the historic brick facade. The tearing of timber and shattering of glass echoed across the valley. By dusk, the grand aristocratic fortress was reduced to a flattened field of dirt and debris. I did not sell the premium acreage to another wealthy developer. Instead, I signed a philanthropic deed transferring the sprawling, highly coveted plot of land directly to the City of Louisville Housing Authority. I attached a specific binding covenant to the donation, ensuring the property could only be utilized to construct affordable, low-income housing units. I took the exclusive sanctuary Virginia used to mock the working class and permanently transformed it into a vibrant, inclusive community for the exact demographic she spent her entire life despising. I erased her family legacy from the county map entirely, replacing her prejudice with tangible, enduring progress. Without her son to subsidize her illusions, Virginia crashed into a harsh financial reality. She now resides in a cramped, humid trailer park situated on the far rural edges of the state. The peeling aluminum siding of her narrow mobile home bakes under the relentless southern sun. The ambient noise of the country club string quartets has been replaced by the constant rattling hum of a struggling window air conditioning unit and the rumble of nearby highway traffic. She is isolated, destitute, and forced to live out her remaining years dwelling on the devastating consequences of her own boundless greed. My own trajectory moved in the exact opposite direction, fueled by the flawless execution of my compliance protocols. Because I had filed the initial secure tip with the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, detailing the exact flow of the embezzled urban development grants, I triggered the parameters of the federal whistleblower program. When the government formally recovered the stolen funds, they issued my legal reward. I received a pristine, untraceable deposit amounting to 30% of the recovered assets. The government effectively paid me a massive bounty for orchestrating the downfall of my corrupt husband. I purchased a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse situated at the very top of a sleek glass high-rise in downtown Louisville. The residence offers uninterrupted panoramic views of the city skyline and the rolling green hills stretching out beyond the river. The evening air is crisp, carrying the faint, sweet scent of the nearby distilleries. I am standing on my private outdoor deck, leaning against the tempered glass railing. I hold a heavy crystal tumbler in my hand. Inside the glass rests a generous pour of a rare 20-year-aged reserve bourbon crafted by the very conglomerate I now help lead. The liquid is a deep, rich mahogany, catching the fading golden light of the setting sun. I take a slow, deliberate sip, allowing the complex notes of charred oak and vanilla to settle on my palate. The warmth travels down my throat, a soothing contrast to the cold, tactical warfare that consumed my life just months ago. I look out over the vibrant, glowing city, a domain I navigated and conquered through sheer, unyielding intellect. The silence of the penthouse is a profound comfort. There are no forged documents waiting in the shadows. There are no deceptive whispers echoing in the hallways. The space belongs exclusively to me, secured by the wealth and authority I generated with my own two hands. People often operate under the dangerous delusion that true power is something you can inherit through a prestigious last name or acquire by slipping a gold band onto the right finger. They believe they can secure their empires by stepping on the shoulders of the people doing the actual grueling work. They are always proven wrong. True, enduring power is never handed to you at a charity gala. It is tactically built in the dark, refined by discipline, and unleashed with undeniable precision. You have heard my journey from the bluegrass ambush to this penthouse view. I turned a coordinated marital betrayal into a masterclass in financial execution, ensuring those who tried to leave me with nothing were left facing the full, crushing weight of their own crimes. Now I turn the floor over to you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and financially outsmart a toxic family member who tried to underestimate your worth? Share your survival stories in the comments below and remind the world that a quiet demeanor should never be mistaken for a weakness. Looking out over the flattened earth where a grand Kentucky estate once stood, it is easy to see the physical wreckage of unchecked greed. The shattered bricks and torn timber resting in the dirt are merely the symptoms of a much deeper, quieter tragedy. The true collapse of that family did not begin with a forged construction loan or a stolen federal grant. It began decades earlier, in the quiet, formative moments of a child's upbringing. When we examine the ashes of Nathan and Virginia's ruined dynasty, we are not just analyzing a corporate fraud. We are bearing witness to the catastrophic failure of family responsibility. In traditional American culture, there is a fierce, almost sacred instinct to protect our children. We are taught to build fortresses around them, to pave their roads with the opportunities we never had, and to shield them from the harsh, biting winds of failure. Virginia built that exact fortress for her son. She draped him in the illusion of generational wealth, adjusting his silk ties and polishing his unearned arrogance while applauding his cutthroat ambition. But in her desperate rush to insulate him from struggle, she starved him of the very foundation required to survive in the real world: character. My own father left me no trust fund, no sprawling estate, and no high society pedigree. He lost his hardware store to a predatory developer, his calloused hands packing up unsold inventory in the sweltering summer heat, sweat stinging his eyes as he surrendered the keys to his livelihood. Yet, his legacy was infinitely richer than anything Virginia ever offered her son. My father gave me a compass. He taught me the quiet, unglamorous dignity of an honest day's labor. He demonstrated that when you make a mistake, you look the injured party in the eye, you own your failure, and you pay the price. That is the essence of long-term guidance. It is the realization that the greatest inheritance a parent can leave is not a portfolio of stocks, but an unshakable inner core. Nathan inherited a crown of fragile glass. I inherited an iron spine. Emotional awareness is frequently discarded in the blind pursuit of status. Traditional family structures sometimes emphasize outward achievement: the corner office, the luxury car, the exclusive country club membership, at the grave expense of inward reflection. Children raised in these curated environments become hollow vessels, echoing the expectations of their parents, but lacking the empathy required to forge genuine human connections. Nathan could orchestrate an elaborate real estate scheme, yet he lacked the basic emotional intelligence to recognize the quiet strength of the woman sleeping beside him. He could not read a room because he was never taught how to read another human being's heart. Virginia raised a shark, but she neglected to teach him how to swim in an ocean of consequences. We often romanticize the image of a mother fiercely defending her child against the world, viewing it as the ultimate expression of maternal devotion. I reject this notion entirely. Blind, unwavering defense is not love. It is the ultimate betrayal of a child's future. When a parent intercepts the natural repercussions of a child's poor choices, they are not saving them from pain. They are simply delaying the impact and multiplying the interest. Virginia thought she was shielding her son when she smiled on the porch with his mistress, when she hid his embezzled assets, and when she enthusiastically participated in his fabricated reality. In truth, her protection was the very poison that ultimately placed him in a federal penitentiary. She handed him the matches, applauded his fire, and then wept when the flames consumed them both. A parent's true responsibility is to make themselves obsolete. It is to equip a child with a moral compass so finely calibrated that they can navigate the darkest ethical dilemmas without needing a hand to hold. When we fail to instill fairness, when we bypass honesty for the sake of convenience or social standing, we send unguided missiles into the world. The destruction they cause belongs to them, but their trajectory was permanently set at the kitchen table. In modern society, we are obsessed with curating our lives. We filter our flaws and broadcast our triumphs. Parenting has in many ways become another performative metric. We want our children to serve as living trophies. But raising a trophy means polishing the surface while entirely ignoring the empty interior. If we truly want to honor the family structure, we must strip away the superficial layers. We must have the courage to let our children fall, to let them scrape their knees on the unforgiving pavement of reality, and to let them feel the stinging bite of a lost opportunity. Only then do they learn how to stand up on their own, fortified by resilience rather than entitlement. We all have choices in how we shape the narratives of our own lives and the lives of those we raise. The stories we tell our children become the inner voices that guide their darkest hours. Here on Sarah Told Stories, we explore these profound human fractures because they serve as mirrors to our own realities. We dissect the anatomy of betrayal to understand the architecture of resilience. If you have ever had to rebuild your own foundation from the rubble of someone else's greed, or if you believe in the quiet, enduring power of integrity, please hit like and subscribe. Join our community as we continue to uncover the truth hiding behind the facades. As I sit on my balcony, looking out over the city, holding a glass of aged bourbon, I think about the legacy we leave behind. We spend our entire lives trying to accumulate wealth for our children, terrified they will inherit our flaws or our struggles. We sacrifice our own peace to shield them from the cold. But perhaps the true danger is not what we leave for them. It is what we withhold from them. The greatest cruelty a parent can inflict is a life devoid of hardship. Hardship is the only chisel capable of sculpting a human soul. If you shield a child from every storm, providing an umbrella for every single drop of rain, you do not raise a survivor. You raise a casualty simply waiting for the weather to change.